Hi everyone, good evening. Here for another update on the West trial. We're on day 20, and today they're closing things out. These aren't the closing statements, this is just the last witness. So let's get to it. Today they brought up Dr. Napolitano, and she's the psychologist that the defense was raving about, was going to come in and prove that the investigators and CPS and all the people at the Jamison Center, they've basically led these children to say the things that they've said about Orrin and Orson being gone, unalived, etc. So let's hear what she has to say. She's treated children who have gone through horrible trauma. She's treated children in her practice. In the past, she has worked with law enforcement. She played a role as a forensic psychologist interviewing children. She has worked with Madeira PD, the FBI, and district attorneys. She has testified around 150 times. She has testified in criminal, civil, and federal court. She has also been asked to speak in court to give expert analysis. She has testified about 50% for the prosecution and about 50% for the defense. Before today, she has not met Jackie or Trezell West. She has not met the West four sons. She was first contacted by Torres Stallings about this case in May of 2022. Before Torres Stallings contacted her about the case, they had never met. She charges $350 per hour for forensic work and less for clinical work. She said she was approved for 100 hours of work, and she may have hit that mark in watching the testimonies in this case. She has reviewed the police reports in this case. They were primary summaries of the first forensic interviews. She also reviewed a police report about Wanda West. She has spent the bulk of her time observing video in this case. She has also read the police summaries and the CPS summaries. She reviewed the transcript of the testimony of Officer Hansen. She listened to the testimony of the West eldest son and Sonia Burton from CPS, the social worker who interviewed the West son. A child forensic interview is different than other interviews, she says, when you're dealing with children, which they've already said that. They said that earlier on. It's based on a long history of scrutinizing bad questions, the do's and don'ts of how to interview children when there is a legal matter at stake. She said if you don't ask the right questions, you may not get the most accurate information from the child. The goal of the forensic interview is to get the most truthful, accurate information from the child, hopefully once and as soon as possible. They don't want people to get away because of a bad interview, or people who don't commit a crime to get away because of a bad interview. She is talking about the effects of misinformation, and she gives an example. Young children play a game of Simon Says. 1 month later, a social worker questioned them. One social worker was told the children played Simon Says, asked them about what they remember about playing Simon Says. Another worker was told the children played Simon Says, but they might have been told to touch another child's toe. The results showed a substantial amount of children had false memories of touching another child's toe when asked if they touched another child's toe. She talked about a case where if you ask a leading question, you can ask yourself, why would I be asking this question if it wasn't true? Then your mind starts to build a memory that didn't happen. Cognitive dissonance happens when you are given two pieces of information that don't add up. So the person will fill in the blanks in their minds. Torres Stallings showed a slide from Dr. Napolitano, and it says these cases influenced how children are questioned with a focus on their capacity for suggestibility. Now, standard police procedure is to record using videotape and notes when interviewing alleged victims. The slide says what is less common but needed is a protocol for an informed, systematical analysis of abuse allegations. The protocols for forensic interviews come from science and make sense. She says problems can arise when a child is interviewed by someone who has not been trained in the forensic interviews. She said it is important not to reveal information to the child in the interview too soon. She talked about suggestibility in a child. She said suggestive questioning has been found to be one of the biggest problems. That is when you give the answer to the question to the child in the question. She's speaking of what suggestibility is. So she gave an example. Did so and so abuse you? Would be a question, instead of an open ended question like, did something happen? She said if you start an interview bias, it is much more likely that the children are going to agree with you. She said if we are told to be neutral, it's not your job to find out the case. They are there to gather facts and information only. She showed a slide about confirmation bias. She said this is when you look for information for your belief and not looking for information that challenges your belief. Tora Stallings asked if a child is asked if someone was in a house or if diapers were there. She said confirmation bias can do that. She said if you are not aware of confirmation bias very early on, then you can be doing it and not looking at another avenue. She said there's been many trainings on confirmation bias, and she said it's a huge contaminating factor in forensic interviews with children. She said if you only look at things you suspect, you can miss a lot. She showed a video, and before the video was showed, the slide would put a question about how many people are passing basketballs. The video showed young people passing basketballs. After the video was shown, the slide said the answer was 15. Then the slide asked, did you notice the gorilla in the video? The video then played again in slower motion and showed a person in a gorilla suit walking by the young people. She said a lot of people will notice the gorilla, but a lot won't. She says this shows when you are not looking for something, you don't see it. She says their standard training is to remain neutral because their goal is to fact find. She says it is customary to have law enforcement, someone from CPS, and someone with the district attorney's office either near the interview or in another room watching the interview. She said the forensic interviewer is trained not to swing to law enforcement. You have specialized training to help the investigation. She said you are not an extension of law enforcement. Tora Stallings asked, are there times where there can be a conflict with the officer in the room? And Dr. Napolitano said yes, because the officer can overstep and ask the interviewer questions to ask. She said some officers respect forensic interviewers or buy in and some don't. She says one of the main goals is to talk to the children as soon as possible and little as possible. She said it can be traumatic for a child and can be a burden for a child to be asked questions over and over again. She said she has conducted about 100 forensic interviews and estimates she has reviewed hundreds of forensic interviews by others in the state. She believes she has seen more than one forensic interview to the same child, but it is rare. She does not recall seeing a second or third interview to the same child. She said the purpose of forensic interviews is so they don't have to be done by law enforcement. She said the point of doing one forensic interview is to prevent contamination and to keep the defense from arguing there is contamination. Which, hello, what is going on right now? She said police officers being interviewed by an officer with a gun can be scary. So she said they try to interview kids in a kid-friendly room with a friendly person not in uniform without leading questions. The forensic interviewer should take into account the age of the child, the situation surrounding the child, any culture contacts surrounding the child. She said narrative practice helps the forensic interview learn the child's cognitive abilities. She said goals are to remain neutral and show empathy. A slide says recall is the retrieval of information from memory without a cue. There is question and you must search your memory for the answer. These are open-ended prompts and are more accurate. Recognition is a response to a sensory cue. When you see something, You compare it to information stored in your memory. And if you find a match, then you recognize it. She says scientifically, children are more suggestible than adults. She says you are trying to get the child to speak in an open ended way and get the child to give you a narrative about what happened. You would consider and perhaps say something about the alternate hypotheses. She says priming is priming, somebody to say things a certain way or see something a certain way. You are putting an idea into somebody's mind, and it could have an influence on how they make sense of the questions and how they answer them. She confirmed priming isn't just for children, it could be for adults too. She said there would be some ground rules like tell the child to tell the truth and make sure they know the difference between truth and untruth. She said it's important to tell the child to say I don't know if they don't know the answer, so they don't try to come up with something if they don't remember. She said one of the biggest violations is to give the child the same question over and over again until the child gives you what you want. She said it is important to tell the child if she speaks the same question more than once, it could be because she didn't understand or didn't remember what they said. It's not because she didn't like their answer. She said risky questions are yes and no questions because they can be. She said risky questions are yes and no questions because they pin the child down. A forced question is a risky question too. Was it this person or that person? Were they here? Were they there? She said you want to avoid those at all cost. She said improper questions are leading questions. This happened to you, didn't it? Also coercive questions. Depending upon how you say a question, your tone of voice can influence the child as well. A leading question can impact the question. She said you don't want to pressure the child. She said another example of this is telling the child they said something when they didn't say it. Social pressure is another improper question, like your family member said this. This can lead to inaccuracies, false allegations. She said when a child is very inconsistent with their statements, their account is likely less accurate. She said if a core detail is consistent and then changes over time, you have to ask, why is this happening? She says an inconsistent allegation is problematic. She was asked what issues were there with Officer Hanson's forensic interview, and she said that it was an open setting, sounds, interruptions. She said there were a number of confusing, leading, compounding questions which you would not do if you were formally trained. She said at the beginning of the interview, he asked, are you aware it was wrong to kill somebody? She said that is highly atypical. Torres Stallings showed a body-worn camera video of California City PD Officer Brian Hanson asking the West's eldest son, do you know it is wrong to kill somebody? And just to remind everybody that's listening, that interview they're discussing was the very first time the children were questioned by PD, or actually by anybody in this case. The son said yes. Officer Hanson said, how do you? The son said, because it's against the law and because why would you want to kill somebody? Officer Hanson said, how did you know? He said, because my parents told me. She said the son was woken up and told to answer these questions. She said this is the first interview the son has had and he's immediately being asked about killing somebody. She said this would prime the son to think someone hurt someone else. Then he asked questions about Orrin and Orson. She said this could connect the dots in his mind that someone hurt or killed Orrin and Orson when that actually might not have happened. She said she did not want to say what the West's eldest son was thinking or feeling. She is saying how questions could lead a child to think a certain way. She says when you ask a child what happened here or what happened there, those are ambiguous questions where there is no clarity. Torres Stallings showed the interview. Officer Hanson asked if you were to guess how many weeks ago you saw Orrin and Orson, and she said, oh, that's bad. You don't want the child to guess. She says there are numbers or questions that just aren't clear, like compound questions or confusing questions. She said his questions aren't clear, like how long ago he saw Orrin and Orson and when Officer Hanson asked the son about being dropped off. She said, is he asking about being dropped off in a kitchen? Dropped off in a room? Oh, come on, guys. And then Prosecutor Smith got up to question Dr. Napolitano. So she was basically explaining to him the difference between the degrees that a psychologist and a psychiatrist have. And she said psychiatrists have a medical master's degree. She said a psychiatrist look at people with a more biological lens, so she can't prescribe medicine to clients. She said she works for the state and she also is an essay predator evaluator. She has her practice and also does forensic work. She also does child evaluation work. She also performs psychotherapy. She says, in terms of her time, evaluating child forensic interviews is not a big part of her time, about 20 to 30%. She said it is a big part of her specialty, though, and what she teaches. Those who teach, you know what they say. No, I'm just kidding. She said the last time she conducted a child forensic interview was in 2006 in the child forensic interview team's response room in Madeira. She said she has been peer reviewed. Okay, 2006, and we're now in 2023. That's easy math, right? Okay. He said, since you work for the prosecution and defense, which one pays better? She said, it depends. She says, a lot of times it is from public funds. And then prosecutor Eric Smith asked, what percentage of your yearly income comes from what you are doing today? She said she didn't know. She said she gets about the same amount of income from her forensic work as she does from the clinical, but she has to do more clinical work to make what she does for forensic. She says she hit 1,000 hours yesterday and asked for 20 more hours. He said, so to do the math, you will have been paid between 35,000 to 42,000 for your testimony today. Ho ho! Mic drop. She said, it is not my testimony. It is for all the work I have done. Smith asked if she was not aware he requested her reports. She said she was not aware. He said, are you aware I did not get the PowerPoint slide until 2 days before you testified? She said she was aware. He asked, why did you think you do not have to write a report? She said, I did not think I did not have to write a report. I was told by the people who hired me if I needed to write a report. She said the people who hired me told her it was not necessary and she didn't ask why. She says she has taken notes on the manuscript. She writes things she notices were problematic. She says for her own purposes, so she can just prepare for today. And she said she's written quite a bit. He asked, so you were not asked for your report until now? She said no one asked her for her report until now. He said, what about your notes? She said she could get it to him. Wow. She confirmed with Smith money could bias you. She said absolutely. He asked if she saw what Dr. Sheerans wrote. She exhibited bias in her client. She said yes, she was aware. She confirmed that lawsuit was dismissed. Okay, so I don't know about this, what they're talking about, but apparently there was a lawsuit. Should I know this? Do y'all know this? I'm not familiar with it. Apparently there was a case that she was testifying in, and there was a lawsuit brought against her, and it was a child custody case. It was dismissed because the judge ruled that Napolitano had not been biased. She did state because she got this from a public defender, that she assumed that her fee would be cut, but she was surprised it was not cut. And Hennessy had asked her if she ever refused a case, and she said yes, she has. Now, Prosecutor Smith did ask her about the offense report in this case, which is nearly 2,000 pages, and she said she did not believe that she's read the report in its entirety. And that was it. Prosecution said they were done, and then both Trezell and Jacqueline's defense attorney said there were no other witnesses that they wanted to bring to the stand. The defense rests. The judge said he is requesting the jury to be back at 2 p.m. tomorrow, which is Thursday, for jury instructions. He will read sunset times and then read them jury instructions. He said it will probably take about 45 minutes to an hour. And I think that if that's the case, I may not have a report for you guys tomorrow. So basically, if you guys don't see me post anything about this tomorrow, the only reason I'm not posting is because there was nothing. It was just jury instructions. Nothing was learned. Because honestly, they're not even coming in till 2 o'clock tomorrow either. So it's just going to be for a few additional items, clarifications, and then they'll read the jury instructions. And then we wait. They'll end tomorrow, but you know what's going to happen. They'll end tomorrow, which is Thursday evening. Then they'll have all day Friday, if needed, for deliberation. So I'm going to have this stuff glued to my ear. You know there's going to be questions. I feel like the jury is going to be asking questions. I wish that I wish all judges did what this past judge did in the Letitia Stout trial, because after each witness was done being questioned by the attorneys, he would turn to the jury and say, "Do you have any questions for this witness?" And then they would write them down and send them up, and they would read them, and the witness would answer them right then and there on the stand. So it kind of, I think it helped in the waiting process for the deliberation. So we'll see. If you don't hear from me tomorrow, you'll know nothing happened. But you might be hearing from me Friday, because we might have a quick one that just tells you guilty, not guilty, and be done with it. So we'll see. Cross your fingers, pray, and you guys have a blessed day, and I will talk to you soon.